This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This marks the beginning of the first half of season 4 of the podcast, so it will be followed by 5 consecutive weeks of new episodes. This week, we'll be talking about the 1979 Italian film Christ Stopped at Eboli, directed by Francesco Rosi. Born in Naples in 1922, Francesco Rosi wasn't interested in making movies at first and actually went to law school before illustrating books for children. In 1946, however, he took up a side job as a production assistant and immediately knew he wanted to be a filmmaker. Rosi assisted neo-realist master Luchino Visconti on films like La Terra Trema and Senso. Listen to episode 13 for more about that film. And made his directorial debut in 1958 with The Challenge, based on the life of mafia boss Pasquale Simonetti. It was not really until 1962 when he made Salvatore Giuliano that he earned international acclaim, including winning a Silver Bear for Best Direction at the Berlin Film Festival. During the 1960s and 70s, Rosi turned to his neo-realist roots and made documentary-style films which juxtaposed fiction with some political elements, including The Mattei Affair, Lucky Luciano, and Illustrious Corpses. In 1979, he eventually made Christ Stopped at Eboli, based on the book of the same name written by Carlo Levi in 1945. Levi's book was largely autobiographical and told the story of time spent as a political prisoner in the tiny town of Aliano in southern Italy. A staunch socialist and an Italian Jew, Levi was arrested in 1934 for his anti-fascist activities and writings, and 2 years later he was sent to live in exile in Aliano. The town was filthy and plagued with malaria, and, as a doctor, Levi found himself as the village's de facto medical man. The title of the book, Christ Stopped at Eboli, is a statement of how Christianity seemed to cease in southern Italy at the town of Eboli, leaving behind everything south of it, including Levi's town of Aliano. A number of filmmakers considered turning Levi's book into a movie, including Rossi's mentor Vittorio De Sica, Pietro Germi, and Roberto Rossellini, but it was Rosi that took up the torch just 4 years after Levi's death. Rossi's film primarily stayed dedicated to Levi's book, but the town appears much more attractive, and malaria is never really an issue. It's mentioned about twice in passing. The story is picaresque in nature, following Levi as he goes from one villager to another, treating their maladies and exploring the nature of small-town life. There is a brief flirtation of a relationship with a maid, tensions with the mayor, and the proclamation of the drunken priest against the country's fascist regime and its dealings in Africa that seem to earn the admiration of the locals while enraging the few city officials. Several prints of the movie exist, the original being a whopping 3 hours and 48 minutes long, which was broadcast on Italian television. Later on, a print was released theatrically in Italy that was 2 hours and 25 minutes long, and this is the version available on DVD, and the film was edited down to 2 hours for its release in America. A major critical success, it won Best Film at Italy's David D. Donatello Awards, and the awards for Best Foreign Film at the French Film Critics Awards in 1981, and the BAFTAs in 1983. Rossi's career would continue, but it had spiked with Christ Stopped at Eboli. He made a handful of films throughout the 1980s and 90s, and remained in retirement until his death in 2015 at the age of 92. In his obituary for The Guardian, David Robertson wrote that he was essentially a crusading investigative journalist concerned with the corruption and inequalities of the economically depressed Italian South. What did I think of Christ Stopped at Eboli? I have a confession. I did not look forward to the prospect of watching 2.5 hours of an Italian film that I've never heard of. My friend Jay Cluett from the Lambcast podcast and the blog Life vs. Film told me less than an hour before I began watching the film that it had been on some critics' lists as among the worst of the 1001 movies. It's probably just a slow burn, I told myself. You've sat through lots of boring films. You can make it through this one. I popped the DVD into the player, anticipating that this would be the greatest treasure to be found since La Ventura. And then, roughly 35 minutes later, I fell asleep. I tried it again a couple days later, a strong cup of tea at hand and with my morale restored. Starting from the beginning again, I assured myself this was just a slow burn. And then it burned. And then burned some more. And then after 2 hours and 25 minutes of smoldering, it ended. Was it cinematic garbage? Certainly not. Did I love it? Definitely not. Did it have some sort of artistic merit deserving to be on the list of allegedly the 1001 greatest movies of all time? I think so. Just let me explain, okay? I think a film can be great on one of at least 3 levels. It can be visually stunning, such as The Spirit of the Beehive, which had a scintilla of a storyline and no obvious morale or point. It can be a spellbinding story, like The Great Escape from episode 25, which is pretty standard Technicolor fare for its time, but a great epic piece of escapism. Or, finally, it could simply exist, much like Red Psalm from episode 26, which has pretty much zilch in the cinematic effects department and completely lacks a story with a beginning and an end, but reflects the filmmaker's political or social opinions, sometimes through metaphor. Christ Stopped at Eboli is in this third category. As his obituary in The Guardian stated, Rossi was apparently a crusader for those in southern Italy who didn't have their privileges of their neighbors to the north. This is fine, but after 2 hours of visiting with one villager after another, I got the sense that he just wanted to depict the trials and tribulations of small-town life. There are several villagers who sing the merits of living in America. One boy leaves the village to join the military, his mother weeping in his wake. The local priest explains that the town's former cathedral simply fell to ruin without any kind of funding or support from the public or the town officials. Throughout all of these, Carlo Levi, the man who was exiled to the village for being a socialist, just looks on passively. I wasn't expecting him to lead the entire population out at the end like the Pied Piper, and thank God nothing close to that does happen, but the least they could give us is Levi's reaction to this. Instead, we wait halfway through the film for his sister to visit, and he complains that the citizens are too passive as fascism airs its ugly head over the village from the north, with the mayor brainwashing them with speeches. Later, some 2 hours into the film, the mayor confronts Levi about the letters to his sister, which reiterate the same opinion, and Levi responds as if he's having an intellectual discussion with a colleague in a coffee bar. Only the drunken priest has something interesting to say in his congregation during Christmas Eve Mass, and the results are highly telling. As a political commentary, I suppose the film stands on its merits, but I'd never know it was made by someone who, during his life, was a crusader for the interests of southern Italy. It's a pretty bloodless film, like a history paper written by a disinterested high school student who is simply paraphrasing the information he's reading in the encyclopedia. I cannot recommend this film unless you are a keen student of the social economics of pre-World War II southern Italy. If you're one of the other 7 billion people on the planet, I'd give it a pass. That's all I have to say about Christ Stopped at Eboli. Tune in next week when we talk about the 1957 legal classic 12 Angry Men, directed by Sidney Lumet. In the meantime, feel free to email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's Facebook page. Until next time, happy viewing.